My husband of 10 years and my sister were having an affair. I found out and did this. My name is Lena Monroe, and I'm 35 years old. What started as a perfect marriage turned into the ultimate betrayal by the two people I trusted most. She'll never find out. That's what my husband told my sister when they started their affair behind my back. If you believe no betrayal should go unpunished, and you live for the moment the guilty get blindsided, this is your place. Hit the subscribe button and buckle up. Karma doesn't miss around here. Now let's begin. Until 3 months ago, I thought I had everything figured out. At 35, I owned a thriving interior design firm in Charlotte, North Carolina. My husband Callum and I had been married for 10 blissful years, living in our dream home that I'd designed myself. Every morning, I'd wake up to the smell of coffee and Callum's warm kiss on my forehead. Our house was a testament to our success. Exposed brick walls, floor-to-ceiling windows, and carefully curated vintage pieces that told the story of our journey together. Callum, my charming real estate broker husband, would often joke that I'd made our house so beautiful, his clients wanted to move in immediately. We had our routines, our inside jokes, our quiet Sunday mornings reading the paper together. I genuinely believed we were unbreakable. That's what made everything that happened next so devastating. But I'm getting ahead of myself, because the day everything changed started with a knock on our door, and my sister Tessa standing there with tears streaming down her face, holding a suitcase that would change our lives forever. Little did I know, I was about to discover just how fragile perfect really was. "Lena, please," Tessa sobbed on my doorstep that rainy Tuesday evening. "I have nowhere else to go." My younger sister had always been the dramatic one. At 29, Tessa Quinn was still chasing and breaking hearts, or getting her own heart broken. This time, she'd been publicly humiliated by her ex-boyfriend at some trendy downtown bar, and the story had made its way onto social media. "Of course you can stay," I said immediately, pulling her into a hug. Callum appeared behind me, concern etched on his handsome face. "Tessa, what happened?" he asked, his voice gentle and caring. That's one of the things I'd always loved about my husband. His immediate compassion for others. As we settled her into our guest room, Tessa explained through hiccuping tears how her boyfriend had cheated on her with her best friend. The betrayal had left her emotionally shattered and financially strapped. She'd quit her job at the PR firm to follow him to Charlotte, and now she had nothing. "Just until I get back on my feet," she promised, squeezing my hand. I should have known then that some promises are meant to be broken. The first week with Tessa felt like old times. We'd grown up together, shared secrets, survived our mother's death when we were teenagers. Having her around brought back memories of late-night talks and sister bonding. But I started noticing small changes in our household dynamic. Callum seemed more animated during dinner conversations. He'd ask Tessa about her day with genuine interest, laugh at her stories with a warmth I hadn't seen from him in months. And Tessa, well, she seemed to recover from her heartbreak remarkably quickly. By day 3, she was flirting with the delivery man. By day 5, she was touching Callum's arm when she laughed, complimenting his cooking, asking his advice about everything from job applications to what to wear. "She's been through so much," Callum would say, when I mentioned how quickly he'd taken to playing the bright, protective big brother role. "We should help her feel welcome." Tessa, meanwhile, had begun dressing up for breakfast. Gone were the pajamas and messy buns of her first few days. Now she'd appear in the kitchen wearing cute sundresses and perfectly applied makeup, claiming she was practicing for job interviews. I pushed away the tiny voice in my head that whispered something wasn't quite right. This was my sister and my husband, two people I trusted completely. What could possibly go wrong? But trust, I was about to learn, can be the most dangerous thing of all. It was a Friday night, 2 weeks after Tessa's arrival. I'd been working late on a particularly demanding client project when I came home to find the house filled with laughter. Following the sound, I discovered Callum and Tessa in the kitchen, cooking dinner together. "Lena," Tessa called out, her cheeks flushed from wine or excitement. I couldn't tell which. "We thought we'd surprise you with homemade pasta." Callum's smile seemed forced as he looked up from the stove. "You've been working so hard lately. We wanted to do something nice." There was flour in Tessa's hair and sauce splattered on Callum's shirt. They looked like they'd been having the time of their lives, and I felt like an outsider in my own home. "That's thoughtful," I managed, setting down my briefcase. During dinner, I noticed how they shared inside jokes about their cooking adventure. How Callum refilled Tessa's wine glass without being asked. How Tessa touched his arm when she laughed at his stories. That night, as Callum and I lay in bed, I tried to bring up what I'd observed. "They're just getting along well," he said dismissively. "Isn't that what you wanted?" But getting along well, and whatever this was, beginning to feel like two very different things. Over the next few days, I watched more carefully. Callum started coming home for lunch, something he'd never done before. I'd catch glimpses of him and Tessa talking in hushed tones that would stop abruptly when I entered the room. Then came the grocery shopping trips. Tessa needed to get out of the house, Callum would explain. I offered to drive her. These errands seemed to take hours for what should have been simple tasks. When I asked Tessa about it, she'd deflect with comments about how helpful Callum was being, how lucky I was to have such a caring husband. The breaking point came on a Thursday evening. I'd left my phone at home and returned to grab it before meeting a client. The house was supposedly empty. Callum at work, Tessa at another job interview. But I heard voices from the kitchen. Soft, intimate voices. I crept closer and peered around the corner. Callum was standing behind Tessa as she chopped vegetables, his hands covering hers on the knife handle. Their bodies were pressed together, and she was leaning back against his chest. "You're so much better at this than I am," she murmured. "I'm good at lots of things," he replied, his voice husky in a way I hadn't heard in months. I backed away silently, my heart hammering with the realization that my world was about to collapse. I didn't confront them that day. Instead, I went to my client meeting in a daze, somehow managing to discuss color palettes and furniture placement while my mind reeled with what I'd witnessed. That evening, both Callum and Tessa acted perfectly normal. Callum kissed me hello with the same casual affection he'd shown for months. Tessa chattered about her job interview, complaining about how difficult it was to find work in Charlotte's competitive market. "Maybe I should consider moving back to Dallas," she mused over dinner, watching Callum's reaction carefully. "Oh no," Callum said quickly. "I mean, you shouldn't give up so easily. Charlotte has so much to offer. Right, Lena?" I nodded mechanically, studying both their faces. Tessa's eyes lingered on Callum with barely concealed affection. Callum avoided my gaze entirely. That night, Callum made love to me with an intensity that felt desperate, almost guilty. Afterward, as he slept beside me, I stared at the ceiling and wondered how long this had been going on. How long had I been living a lie? But the worst part wasn't what I'd already discovered. It was knowing there was so much more I hadn't seen yet. I started paying attention to details I'd previously overlooked. The way Callum's phone was always face down now. How Tessa had suddenly become very interested in fitness, taking long morning runs that coincidentally ended just as Callum left for work. 2 days after the kitchen incident, I decided to test my suspicions. I announced at breakfast that I'd be working late again, a big presentation for potential new clients. "Don't wait up," I told Callum, kissing his cheek. "This could go until midnight." Instead, I drove to my office but left again after an hour, parking down the street from our house. I felt ridiculous, like some paranoid wife in a bad movie. But paranoid wives, I was learning, sometimes have good reason to be paranoid. At 8:30, I crept up to our own front window and peered through the gap in the curtains. Callum and Tessa were on our couch, my couch, the one I'd selected after hours of searching for the perfect piece. They were kissing with the passion of new lovers, her hands tangled in his hair, his hands roaming places they had no right to be. I watched my husband of 10 years and my baby sister cross the line from emotional affair to physical betrayal. And in that moment, something inside me didn't break. It hardened into something cold and calculating. Instead of bursting through the door in a rage, I quietly returned to my car. The old Lena might have confronted them immediately, might have screamed and cried and demanded explanations. But this new version of myself, the one born in that moment of ultimate betrayal, had different plans. I drove to a 24-hour diner and ordered coffee I couldn't taste, my mind racing with possibilities. How long had this been going on? Had they planned this before Tessa even arrived? Or had it developed after she moved in? More importantly, what was I going to do about it? Over the next week, I became a detective in my own life. I started noticing patterns I'd missed before. Callum's sudden interest in working out, something he claimed was for his health, but conveniently happened during Tessa's morning runs. The way grocery bills had increased, not just for extra food, but for wine, for treats, for things that suggested celebrations. I checked our credit card statements more carefully. Lunch charges when Callum said he was eating at his desk. A charge for flowers on a day when no flowers appeared in our house. I even found a receipt in his pants pocket for lingerie from a boutique downtown. Lingerie that definitely wasn't my size. Each piece of evidence was like another nail in the coffin of my marriage. But I kept hammering them in any way. Technology, I realized, was going to be my best friend or my worst enemy. Since Callum and I shared an iCloud account for photos and had each other's passwords for emergencies, I had access to more information than they realized. While they were out on one of their supposed grocery runs, I logged into Callum's email account. My hands shook as I scrolled through his messages, looking for anything suspicious. There weren't many emails between them. They were being smart about that. But I found a few messages to his business partner about needing more flexible lunch hours and canceling client meetings for family obligations. His text messages were more revealing, though most had been deleted. The few remaining were innocuous on the surface but felt loaded with subtext. "Thanks for listening yesterday. You really understand." From Tessa. "Anytime. That's what I'm here for." Callum's response. "Elle working late again tonight. Seems like she's always working these days." Tessa. "Some people show love through work. Others show it through presence." Callum. That last message hit me like a physical blow. He was criticizing me to my own sister, justifying their affair by painting me as a neglectful wife. But they had no idea that their biggest mistake was yet to come. It was a Sunday morning, 2 weeks after I'd started my investigation. Callum was in the shower, and Tessa was out on one of her runs. I was supposedly making breakfast, but really I was going through Callum's tablet, which he'd left charging on the kitchen counter. I opened the photo app, expecting to find the usual collection of house pictures, vacation photos, and random screenshots. Instead, I found a folder labeled Memories that I'd never seen before. My finger hovered over it for a moment. Once I opened this, there would be no going back to blissful ignorance. I tapped it. The folder contained dozens of photos of Callum and Tessa together. Selfies taken in our backyard, pictures of them cooking in our kitchen, images of them hiking trails I'd never been to. But the most damning photo was the most recent one, taken just 2 days ago. It showed them kissing passionately in our kitchen, my kitchen, with Tessa pressed against the counter where I made my morning coffee every day. They looked blissfully happy, completely lost in each other. The timestamp showed it was taken during Callum's lunch break when I thought he was at the office. I screenshotted every single photo and emailed them to myself before deleting the evidence of my snooping. Now I had proof. The question was, what was I going to do with it? After discovering the photos, I sat in my car for 20 minutes, hyperventilating. The weight of betrayal crashed over me like a tsunami. My husband, my sister, my home, my life, all of it contaminated by their lies. I called June with shaking hands, barely able to speak through my tears. "Lena? What's wrong? You sound." "They're having an affair," I choked out. "Callum and Tessa, in my house, I have photos." Silence. "Then come to the boutique. Now. Don't go home." 20 minutes later, I was sobbing in June's back office while she locked the front door and made tea with hands steadier than mine. "Show me," she said simply. I handed her my phone with the screenshots. I watched her face change as she scrolled through the images. Shock, anger, then cold calculation. "How long?" she asked. "I think about 2 weeks. Maybe longer." My voice sounded surprisingly steady now that the initial breakdown was over. June set down the phone and leaned forward. "Okay, here's what we're not going to do. We're not going to confront them in a fit of rage. We're not going to throw them out tonight and change the locks. And we're absolutely not going to let them know that you know." "But June?" "No buts. You're hurt right now, and rightfully so. But hurt people make bad decisions. We're going to be smart about this. That conversation changed everything. June didn't just save me from making emotional mistakes, she taught me that revenge was a dish best served strategically. After June calmed me down, she pulled out her phone and started making notes. First, we need to understand your legal and financial position. What's in your name versus his name? What assets do you have? What would a divorce look like? June's questions made me realize how little I knew about my own financial security. That evening, while Callum and Tessa shared meaningful glances over dinner, I mentally cataloged our assets. The house was in my name. I'd bought it before we married, and we'd never changed the deed. My business was solely mine, registered under an LLC I'd established independently. Our joint checking account had about $15,000, but my business account, which Callum couldn't access, held significantly more. Over the next few days, I quietly began organizing documents. I made copies of everything: marriage certificate, insurance policies, bank statements, tax returns. I stored them in a safety deposit box at a different bank, one Callum didn't know about. I also hired a private investigator. I need to know everything, I told him over the phone. How long this has been going on, whether there were others before, everything. You know, June said during one of our planning sessions, you've always mentioned that Tessa had a jealous streak growing up. Think she might have come here with an agenda? The question planted a seed that would grow into something much darker. But for now, I was focused on building an unbreakable case against them both. Acting on June's advice, I began quietly reorganizing my finances. Over the course of 2 weeks, I started routing new client payments to a separate business account at a different bank instead of our joint account, documenting each transfer as legitimate business restructuring. While Tessa was out job hunting one afternoon, I used her laptop, she'd left it open on our kitchen counter, to screenshot her email exchanges with various PR agencies. The information would be useful later. I also reviewed my business documentation, confirming everything was already protected under my LLC. If Callum thought he had any claim to my company, he was about to be very disappointed. The hardest part was acting normal at home. Every morning, I made coffee for all three of us. Every evening, I asked about their days with genuine seeming interest. I even suggested activities we could do together as a family. Maybe we should plan a weekend getaway, I mentioned casually over dinner one Thursday. Somewhere relaxing where we can all decompress. Callum and Tessa exchanged a quick glance. That sounds nice, Tessa said carefully. Where were you thinking? My client Mrs. Rodriguez mentioned this amazing lake house she rented last month. She said it was beautiful and very private. I kept my voice light, perfect for some honest conversations. Callum shifted uncomfortably in his seat. We could look into it. I'll make some calls, I said, already knowing exactly what kind of weekend I was planning. They thought they were getting a relaxing getaway. They had no idea they were walking into their own judgment day. Booking the lake house was easier than I'd expected. Mrs. Rodriguez was happy to share her contact information, and the owners had a last-minute cancellation for the following weekend. It's perfect, I told June over the phone. Isolated, beautiful, and far enough from Charlotte that they can't just storm off easily. Are you sure you want to do this? June asked. Once you confront them, there's no taking it back. There's already no taking this back. They made sure of that. Over the next few days, I finalized my preparations. I printed copies of all the evidence, photos, text messages, credit card statements, everything that documented their affair. I also printed copies of divorce papers that June had helped me prepare, though I hadn't filed them yet. Most importantly, I composed carefully worded anonymous emails about their unprofessional conduct. For Callum's real estate firm, I had their contact information from his business cards. For Tessa, I used the agency information I'd gathered from her laptop. I scheduled those emails to send on Monday morning, right after our weekend confrontation when they'd be back in Charlotte, scrambling to deal with the professional fallout. This weekend will be so good for us, I told them Friday evening as we packed. Quality time away from all the distractions. If only they knew that the biggest distraction was about to be permanently removed from their lives. Saturday morning dawned clear and beautiful. Perfect weather for destroying lives. I drove while Callum and Tessa chatted in the passenger seat and back seat respectively, both seeming relaxed and happy. They had no idea this would be the last time the three of us would ever be in the same car together. The lake house is supposed to have this amazing deck that extends right over the water, I said conversationally. Perfect for watching sunsets. Sounds romantic, Tessa said, then quickly caught herself. I mean relaxing. Sounds relaxing. In the rearview mirror, I watched Callum give her a warning look. Even now, they were being careful about their word choices around me. It would have been funny if it weren't so pathetic. We stopped for lunch at a small roadside diner, and I excused myself to use the restroom. Instead, I checked my phone to confirm that my scheduled emails were still set to send Monday morning. They were. In approximately 60 hours, several people in both of their professional circles would receive very interesting information about their character. When I returned to the table, they were holding hands under the table, thinking I couldn't see. Ready for our weekend getaway? I asked brightly. They had no idea that their weekend getaway was about to become a weekend nightmare. The lake house was everything Mrs. Rodriguez had promised, isolated, beautiful, and perfectly positioned for the kind of private conversation I had planned. We were the only guests, with the nearest neighbor about half a mile away. This is incredible, Tessa breathed as we carried our bags inside. Lena, you always find the most amazing places. The irony of her compliment wasn't lost on me. Yes, I had found an amazing place. Amazing for exposing cheating hearts and ending relationships. We spent the afternoon settling in, exploring the property, and preparing dinner together. It was almost like old times, except for the undercurrent of tension and the way Callum and Tessa kept finding excuses to touch each other when they thought I wasn't looking. That evening, we sat on the deck with wine and watched the sunset paint the lake in shades of gold and crimson. It was breathtakingly beautiful, and under different circumstances, it might have been the perfect family moment. This is nice, Callum said, reaching over to squeeze my hand. We should do this more often. The casual intimacy of his touch, knowing where those same hands had been, made my stomach turn. But I smiled and squeezed back. We should definitely make this a tradition, I agreed. After tonight, the only tradition we'd have would be the annual anniversary of the day I destroyed them both. Dinner was a masterpiece of tension, disguised as normalcy. I'd prepared all of Callum's favorite foods and opened a bottle of wine that Tessa had mentioned loving. They both seemed touched by the gesture, thinking it was my way of strengthening our family bond. If only they knew it was actually their last meal as free people. I've been thinking a lot lately, I said as we finished our main course. About family, about trust, about the people we let into our lives. Callum shifted uncomfortably. That's pretty philosophical for a Saturday night. Maybe, but sometimes life forces you to examine what really matters. I refilled their wine glasses. For instance, I've realized how much I value honesty in relationships. Tessa's fork froze halfway to her mouth. Honesty is important, she agreed carefully. Absolutely. I mean, what's the point of any relationship without complete trust and transparency? I smiled at both of them. Don't you think, Callum? My husband's face had gone pale. Of course, trust is essential. Good. I'm so glad we all agree on that. I stood up and began clearing the dishes. Why don't you two relax on the deck? I'll handle cleanup and then join you for dessert. But dessert was going to be much more bitter than they expected. While I cleaned up in the kitchen, I could hear Callum and Tessa talking in hushed tones on the deck. I couldn't make out the words, but their body language, visible through the large windows, told me everything I needed to know. They were worried. Good. I arranged my evidence on the kitchen counter, like a prosecutor preparing for trial. Photos printed in full color, bank statements, highlighting suspicious charges, screenshots of text messages, and copies of the emails I'd scheduled to send Monday morning. When I joined them on the deck, they were sitting close together, Tessa's hand on Callum's arm in what they probably thought was a casual sisterly gesture. Beautiful evening, I said, setting down a tray with coffee and the manila folder containing their doom. Perfect for clearing the air. What's in the folder? Tessa asked, trying to keep her voice light. Oh, Just some paperwork I've been meaning to discuss with both of you. I sat down across from them and opened the folder slowly, savoring the moment. You know how I am about organization. Callum leaned forward slightly, and I saw the exact moment he recognized the top photo, the one of him and Tessa kissing in our kitchen. His face went completely white. Game over. What is this? Callum whispered, staring at the photo. This, I said calmly, is my evidence file. Would you like to see more? I spread the photos across the deck table like playing cards. Each image told the story of their affair. The secret touches, the private moments, the intimate gestures they thought no one would ever see. Tessa started crying immediately. Lena, I can explain. No need for explanations. The pictures speak for themselves. I pulled out the bank statements next. This is documentation of the money you've been spending on your affair. Lunches, flowers, hotel rooms. Callum found his voice. Lena, please let me. And these, I continued, ignoring his interruption, are screenshots of your text messages. The ones where you criticize me to my sister, where you make plans to meet while I'm working, where you discuss how understanding Tessa is compared to your neglectful wife. The silence stretched between us, broken only by Tessa's quiet sobbing and the gentle lapping of water against the dock below. How long have you known? Callum finally asked. Long enough to prepare. I smiled at them both. Which brings me to the really interesting part of tonight's presentation. They thought the photos were the worst of it. They had no idea what was coming next. This morning, I said, pulling out printed copies of the emails I'd prepared, I scheduled some very interesting information to be sent to people who have a right to know what kind of person they're working with. Callum snatched the papers from my hands, his eyes scanning quickly. You're going to send this to my office? To my clients? Monday morning, bright and early, several people will receive documentation about your real character. Your real estate firm, for instance, will learn that their broker has been lying to clients about his availability while conducting an affair. Tessa's crying intensified. Lena, please, you don't understand. And Tessa, all those PR agencies you've been interviewing with will get copies too. Funny how quickly your job prospects disappear when potential employers learn you're willing to sleep with your sister's husband. Callum stood up abruptly, his hands shaking. You can't do this. This is justice, I said firmly. You both made choices. Now you get to live with the consequences. I pulled out my phone and showed them the scheduled emails. Monday morning, 8 a.m. sharp. You'll have exactly one business day to try to do damage control before your entire professional world learns the truth. The look of devastation on their faces should have made me feel guilty. Instead, it felt like the first deep breath I'd taken in weeks. But I wasn't finished with them yet. Now, let's talk about money, I said, pulling out the final section of my evidence folder. Callum, you might be wondering about our joint accounts. His face, already pale, somehow went even whiter. What about them? Well, it's interesting. I've been reviewing our finances, and it turns out that most of our major assets are actually in my name. The house, for instance, bought before we were married, never added your name to the deed. I handed him a legal document. This is a property ownership verification. As you can see, you have no legal claim to our home. Tessa looked confused. What does that mean? It means, I continued pleasantly, that when we return to Charlotte tomorrow, I'll be having the locks changed. A locksmith is already scheduled for first thing Monday morning. Neither of you will be welcome there anymore. Callum was reading through the documents frantically. The business, surely I have some claim to. My business? The one I started before we met? The one that's registered under my LLC, which you've never had any involvement with? I laughed. No, Callum, that's mine too. I pulled out one final document. These are divorce papers, pre-filled, ready to file. You'll notice that given the circumstances and the asset distribution, you'll be walking away with almost nothing. The power I felt in that moment was intoxicating. For the first time in weeks, I was in complete control. Callum crumpled into his chair, the reality of his situation finally hitting him. Lena, please, we can work this out. It doesn't have to be like this. Work it out? I stood up, my carefully maintained composure finally giving way to the anger I'd been storing for weeks. You had an affair with my sister in my home, and you want to work it out? Tessa reached for my hand. Lena, I'm so sorry. I never meant for this to happen. I was hurt and confused, and you decided the best way to deal with your pain was to sleep with my husband? I yanked my hand away. In my kitchen? On my couch? Using my home as your personal love nest? We never meant to hurt you, Callum said weakly. But you did hurt me, repeatedly, deliberately. And more than that, you disrespected me, lied to me, and made me feel crazy for noticing the changes in my own marriage. The dam had burst, and 10 years of trust and love were washing away in a flood of betrayal and rage. You made me question my own sanity, I continued. You made me feel like I was being paranoid and jealous when I was actually being reasonable and observant. But my anger, white hot as it was, had been carefully channeled into something much more effective than screaming. There's one more thing, I said, my voice returning to its earlier calm tone. Something I think you should know before you start planning your new life together. I pulled out my phone and showed them a text message thread. These are messages from the private investigator I hired 3 weeks ago. Callum's eyes widened. You hired a PI? I did, and what he discovered was very interesting. I scrolled through the messages. It turns out this isn't the first time either of you has done something like this. Tessa's face went ashen. What do you mean? I mean, Callum, you had an emotional affair 2 years ago with that client, Jennifer Morrison. You thought I never found out, but you'd been texting her for months. Callum's mouth fell open. How did you? And Tessa, your last 3 relationships ended because you cheated. Each time with someone close to your boyfriend, his brother, his best friend, his roommate. I showed them the investigator's report. You're both serial cheaters. This isn't love or passion or a mistake. This is just who you are. The look that passed between them was priceless. The realization that their great love affair was just another pattern of betrayal for both of them. It was perfect. Not only had I destroyed their future together, I'd shown them exactly what kind of people they really were. I stood up and collected my evidence folder, leaving the copies for them to keep as souvenirs. I'll be leaving now. There's a taxi coming to pick me up in 10 minutes. Where are you going? Tessa asked numbly. Home, to my house, to start my new life. I slung my purse over my shoulder. You two can figure out your own transportation back to Charlotte, or don't. I honestly don't care anymore. Callum stood up desperately. Lena, wait, please, we can fix this. I love you. I turned to face him one last time. If you loved me, you never would have done this. If you loved me, you would have talked to me about whatever was missing in our marriage instead of finding it in my sister's bed. I made a mistake. You made a choice. Every day for weeks, you chose her over me. You chose lies over honesty. You chose betrayal over communication. I headed for the door. Now you get to live with that choice. Outside, I could hear the taxi approaching on the gravel road. Perfect timing. Goodbye, Callum. Goodbye, Tessa. I hope you're very happy together. And for the first time since I'd discovered their affair, I meant every word I said. 6 months later, I was sitting in my beautifully redesigned home office, the same space where I'd once planned room layouts for clients, but now redecorated to erase every trace of my old life. The divorce had gone through exactly as I'd planned. Callum had tried to fight it initially, but the evidence was overwhelming, and his legal position was hopeless. He'd ended up signing everything I'd put in front of him. Tessa had moved back to Dallas in disgrace. The anonymous leaks about her affair had spread through Charlotte's social media networks, destroying not just her professional reputation, but her personal relationships too. Her former friends had cut her off completely, and even Callum had rejected her within weeks, realizing she'd manipulated them both. Callum had eventually found a new job at a smaller firm, but his reputation never fully recovered. Word travels fast in Charlotte's real estate community. The last mutual friend who mentioned him said he seemed older, sadder, and completely alone. As for me, my business had never been better. Turns out, having a reputation for being thorough, strategic, and unforgiving was excellent for business. Clients trusted me to handle their most important projects because they knew I paid attention to every detail. June stopped by that afternoon with coffee and updates on her latest boutique expansion. Any regrets? She asked, settling into the chair across from my desk. I looked around my beautiful, peaceful, betrayal-free home and smiled. Not a single one. Because I didn't just lose a husband, I found myself. Sometimes the best revenge isn't getting mad, it's getting even, getting out and getting on with a better life. The end.